Hey guys, this is Mike, letusreason.com. I want to do a video today taking the view called Preterism to task. Now, I've seen enough by people pushing this view online, and I've seen enough comments on this, and so today we're going to take this view apart piece by piece. I'm going to show you exactly why you need to not allow yourself to be influenced by it. It's a view that just doesn't take reading and studying the Bible seriously. It doesn't take what the Bible says seriously. It's a view that's built upon taking a few select Bible passages out of context or coming to a conclusion based on misunderstanding a small handful of passages at the expense of totally, grossly ignoring the vast majority of what the scripture very clearly says. And so we're going to get into it today, and I'm going to actually demonstrate why people who buy into this view are typically not very serious Bible students, why they're typically people who hear some superficial TikTok style arguments and be convinced of it. And it's because they simply do not know what the Bible says. It's like people who watch a 10-second preview of a movie and they think they know what happens. Well, honestly, that's the best way that I can describe the typical, I'll call them victims of preterism. So what actually is preterism? For those who haven't encountered this term. Well, preterism is a hermeneutical approach that interprets end times Bible prophecies, particularly those in the book of Revelation and also in the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and parallel passages. It interprets them as events that have already occurred, already happened in the first century. And they typically imagine that they were fulfilled in the events surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, there are two main types of preterism, partial preterism and full preterism. Partial preterism believes that many, or basically all prophecy was fulfilled in the first century, with the usual exception, typically the only exception, being the second coming of Christ. So the Antichrist, all the day of the Lord judgments, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, all the cosmic events described in Revelation, and so many other things, it all happened already, but not so that you'd notice, right? And this is really what I mean when I say preterists just don't take the text seriously. Because if you actually go and read through Revelation, you can't ignore the cosmic and the global scope of all of the events that it talks about. And so to ignore that and to dumb it down to really just be sort of some little local events that maybe the inhabitants of the city of Jerusalem witnessed in the first century, even though even that is incorrect, even after dumbing down the scope of it, you still have to dumb down the actual events themselves to the point that you're literally just changing the words of the text. But this is what I mean by they're just not taking the Bible seriously. It's like, if you're a kid and your mom tells you to go take a bath and you instead interpret what she said to mean dump a cup of water on your head. You think that you're clean now. You're obeying her instruction by doing that. Well, you just aren't taking her instruction seriously. There's no other way to say it. And so partial preterism is bad enough. But then there's full preterism, which claims that all biblical prophecies, even the second coming of Jesus and the resurrection, were all fulfilled by AD 70, basically. And since it's abundantly obvious that none of those things actually happened, they have to employ the use of allegorization, meaning basically they read the text and they decide that it doesn't actually mean what it says. They make the executive decision that it's really all just to be interpreted allegorically. They spiritualize it. There's no actual physical, visible, real second coming of Jesus. It all already happened, but it was sort of just kind of a spiritual thing. You can't see it. You just have to take their word for it. You have to ignore all the Bible verses that talk about all eyes seeing him at his second coming and everything else. You have to ignore all the details that the Bible gives us, because to the preterist, that doesn't really matter. Doesn't mean what it says. They don't actually mean anything. And the same goes for the resurrection. There's no real resurrection. We don't actually get glorified bodies. It's really kind of just some sort of spiritualized thing that Well, you have to just believe us that it happened 2,000 years ago. And you just have to ignore all the details that the Bible speaks about in all the passages that actually describe the resurrection. And so, again, I trust that you can easily see what I mean when I say that they just don't take the Bible seriously. They allegorize everything to the point where nothing means anything anymore. But worst of all, they do it in situations where the text gives no literary indication whatsoever that it's intended to be interpreted allegorically. It's simply just people taking their own liberties with the text of Scripture, making it mean whatever they want it to mean, with their own imaginations being the only guideposts instead of the text itself. It's, in my opinion, it's the definition of disrespect for the Word of God, because you make yourself king by doing this. You make yourself the ultimate authority. And the Bible itself, the actual text that God inspired, well, it just becomes some kind of almost like a children's fairy tale storybook that you can interpret any way you want, some kind of fictional thing, and just make it in your own image. You'll see even more of what I mean as we go. Now, what kind of millennial view do preterists take? Well, basically anything but premillennial. Preterism can coexist with either an amillennial or a postmillennial view. Amillennial, of course, means that there is no actual millennium. It's really just kind of spiritual, again, in our hearts, and we're in the kingdom now. And, you can see how that would go along with a preterist. That's how they interpret also. And then postmillennial, which is pretty similar to amillennial in that we're also either in the kingdom now or we're bringing it about to its completion, and it's our job to try to complete the kingdom so that Christ can return after we do so. And so there can be amillennial preterists and postmillennial preterists. So again, basically everything except premillennial, which is, of course, what we advocate on this channel, since we take a consistent literal view of the text. Or in other words, we simply allow the text to speak itself, and we simply accept what it says. Okay, now, before we get into dismantling preterism, I want to first spend a couple of moments addressing the top arguments of preterists. I don't want to ignore that. And I can assure you that this won't take very long, and it won't really be very difficult because it's all very easy to answer. So first, one of the most common arguments that you're going to hear all the time from preterists have to do with Jesus's this generation statement in the Olivet Discourse. Like in Matthew 24:34, where he says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass until all these things that he just described take place." So they argue that this generation refers to people who are alive during Jesus's time, which they then take to mean that those prophecies within the Olivet Discourse were fulfilled in AD 70. But it's very easy to see that that's not the case at all, because they're operating on a false premise. Jesus was not referring to the generation of his day. He was referring to the generation in the future who would witness all the eschatological end time signs that he just finished describing. So in other words, he gave a full sequence of signs in answer to the disciples' specific question about what would be the signs of his coming and of the end of the age. And he never said it was that generation of people who was alive during his day. He described the sequence of signs that would take place during that future broad day of the Lord, when he was, his parousia, when he was going to come. And he said the same generation that sees the beginning of these signs is going to be the same generation that sees the final sign, which is his physical coming to the earth, that all eyes would see him. So he limits this eschatological period of judgment that he just described, all this sequence of signs, he limits it to one generation. Very simple. That's it. It's as easy as that. So the second argument that you're going to hear from preterists is also incredibly simple. They take all of the imminent statements that Jesus routinely made in the Gospels when he started to talk about his return. He started to reveal his parousia, and in Revelation also. But these are all throughout the epistles as well. And the preterists, they see how Jesus was always saying things like, I'm coming quickly, soon, I'm near, I'm at hand. He told people to watch, to be ready. And they misunderstand that to mean that Jesus was saying it's going to happen in the first century. So they're interpreting it the way that we would today in modern English, very technical environment. If you say, I'm going to do something soon, well, you mean in the next 5 minutes. That's not what it means in the Greek. And so basically, they see this immediacy language and they come up with their own definition. They're importing a modern understanding of these words, how they're translated into English, of how soon Jesus meant. What did he mean by soon? Well, they're going to tell you. They take that liberty. But the reality is that's not at all what Jesus was doing. He never capped the time limit by saying, I'm coming soon. And by soon, I mean within 100 years or within 50 years or within 25 or 10 or 5 or no, he never said anything at all like that. It's just what preterists are assuming that those immediacy statements mean, but it's all just their own subjective opinions. And the reality of it is incredibly simple. These are all statements of imminence: quickly, soon, shortly, at hand, near, I'm at the door. There's more of them too, but that's basically, the gist of it. And none of them mean that he has to come by a certain time. They're imminence language. And it simply means that he could return at any moment. And so we have to expect him at any time and to be perpetually ready for him. That's all it means. That we're always supposed to view his return as being potentially near, soon, at hand, etc., because that's what imminence means. It's the mentality that he wants us to always possess as we await him. And by the way, quickly in the Greek, which is used a lot of times, especially in Revelation, quickly does not mean what we think of as today. It doesn't mean quick as opposed to slow. This is the Greek word tachy, and the real sense of how it's being used is as an imminent statement, just like all the others. And Strong's Concordance defines it as meaning without delay, soon, or by surprise, suddenly, or by implication of ease, readily, lightly, quickly. And so it's an imminent statement. It's not a statement of how fast the coming is going to transpire or that it's going to happen within a certain amount of time. That totally misses and changes the entire point. It's that he's coming quickly in the sense of soon, without delay, and suddenly. That's really the point of it. It's that something sudden can happen at any time. You're always supposed to expect it as just being able to transpire any moment. So yes, there's an aspect of it that involves quickness because the meaning involves suddenness and sudden things happen quickly. But the sense is sudden, imminent, unexpected, unpredictable, an ongoing any moment possibility. It doesn't mean quickly in terms of setting a time deadline that it has to occur by. Like it has to happen in 15 minutes or else, well, it wasn't really quick. No, there's no deadline. It's a perpetual urgency based on the constantly impending nature of Christ's coming. It's constantly hanging over our heads. It's something that could transpire at any moment, and we're always expected to expect it that way. It's that simple, guys. So it's just basic imminence language. Now, there's a third argument by preterists, and it relates to how in Matthew 16, Jesus promised certain of his disciples that some of them wouldn't die before they see the Son of Man himself coming in his kingdom. And so they take that, preterists do, to mean that the kingdom had to be inaugurated while these disciples were still alive. And you can understand that thought process, but only if you were not familiar with the Bible. Because when you go and read this you read this passage, and then you continue reading into the next chapter, it fulfills it. It becomes very obvious what he meant. He was referring to the event that immediately followed in the next chapter where this did happen. Matthew 17, the transfiguration of Jesus. It was at the transfiguration that a couple of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, caught a glimpse of Jesus being displayed in the light of his divine glory as he will be in the future kingdom. They were granted a glimpse of this, a preview. And so, yes, a few of the disciples did experience this glimpse of Jesus's glory in the kingdom. It's a glimpse into the future, guys, into that future coming in glory. And yet it's very clear and obvious that this coming is still future. And then Revelation tells us all about it. And Revelation was written in 95 AD, long after 70 AD for sure, and definitely long after Jesus made this statement. So again, this is not very difficult. Now, there's another argument that preterists use, and it relates to Jesus' statement in Matthew 10:23, that similarly, the disciples would not finish evangelizing in all the towns in Israel until he returned. This is taken by preterists to mean that Jesus returned. He must have returned, they reason, during their lifetimes. But again, this is not true at all. It assumes that they had finished evangelizing all these cities. We're never told that. There were probably more than 1,000 cities and villages in Israel at the time of Christ. Israel covered thousands of square miles. Nothing in the New Testament says the disciples ever finished going to all the cities of Israel. Again, Jesus said they would not finish going through the cities until he returned. They would not finish, okay? And he hasn't returned. So they had not finished going through all the cities. Again, pretty simple. That's it. Okay, guys, these are the top arguments of preterists. That's pretty much all they have. And then they'll try to look into the writings of the Jewish first century historian Josephus, who recorded a lot of the details of the Roman siege of Jerusalem around 70 AD. And they'll dumb down the details, they'll dumb down the prophecies in the Bible and then dumb down the details also, because they try to find these things in Josephus that they can force it to fit. That's what they do. That's all they have, guys. That's preterism in a nutshell. It's a form of deception that relies on you either not knowing the details. That's the key word, is details. They depend on you not knowing the details of the Bible beforehand, because if you did beforehand, you'd never agree to this. You'd say, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? You'd never agree to this. You have to either not know the details beforehand, or you have to not care about them. And you have to be willing to carelessly allegorize them. And so what we're going to do now is let's just start to use those details to begin to pick apart preterism piece by piece and to just expose it for the farce that it is. Now, again, I've quickly addressed their top arguments, I think without any difficulty. But as I'm about to show you, they're not going to be able to do the same about what I'm about to say without ignoring and grossly allegorizing the details of what the text actually says. Now, we can basically make this video as long as we want to, because the Bible gives us that many details about the end times. And this is going to be a long video. And there's a lot to say here. So what I'm going to try to do is not spend too much time on each one. I can delve into it, but it's just, we don't need to do that. Otherwise the video is going to be 10 hours long of all the things that preterists have to answer. So instead, I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly, but I'm going to provide references so that you guys can go and look up these passages on your own time. So as we start, just keep in mind that these are everything that we're going to talk about from now to the end of the video. They're all things, biblical events that preterists would have to believe already happened. And you'll see for yourself just how absurd this is the further we go. So let's just begin right with the opening event of the end times, which is the rapture, or the catching away of the church, and the simultaneous beginning of the broad day of the Lord judgments on the wicked who are left behind. We're going to speak more precisely about those judgments as we continue. But I want to just start with the rapture of the church, and it takes place as a rescue from the imminent judgment that's going to come upon those who are left behind. And what takes place at this event? Well, we're told that dead believers are resurrected and they're given heavenly glorified bodies, while the living believers, remember those who are alive and remain, get glorified resurrection bodies. all together, the same type of body, and they're caught up to heaven by the Lord to then go to the Bema seat judgment in heaven. And this is a judgment that is kind of the opposite of a judgment. It rewards the raptured Christians. All this is found in the passages that I have up on the screen. So for your homework or for an ongoing Bible study, I'm going to put a slide up for each of these just like this. And if you want, you can screenshot it and you can then go look up each one just to be a Berean, just to make sure that what I'm telling you is accurate. Because again, we just don't have the time in this video to delve deeply into each one. You're going to see why that is as we go. There's just too much to talk about. And so the scriptures for this one are John 14, 1-3, 1 Thessalonians 1, 9-10, 1 Thessalonians 4, 13-18, 1 Thessalonians 5, 9, 1 Corinthians 15, 51-52, 2 Corinthians 5, 10, and Revelation 3, 10. So if you're a preterist, how can you say any of this happened? We're still all here. I still have my normal body. I'm in the flesh. Where was the supernatural catching away of the church from the earth to heaven, which is described clearly in all of these passages? Well, there was never any catching away of the church or disappearance of believers ever recorded in history or remembered by anyone. Now, I think someone would have noticed probably if all the Christians got suddenly just yanked off the planet, if everyone just disappeared, all these empty churches, or at least mostly empty, let's say. Now, I'm a Christian, and I think I would have remembered getting a glorified body and getting the Bema seat blessings. When was the resurrection of dead believers of the church age? You've got to tell us when this was. As a Christian who's promised to be a part of this event, either as a dead believer or one who's alive at the time, I think I would know about this, or at least I would know someone who remembered it or who experienced it. And so how do preterists handle this? Well, most full preterists don't even believe in a rapture. Now, I have no idea how they just delete those passages from the Bible, but they do. And this is typical preterist form. This is exactly why their beliefs are so dangerous, and it's why I'm making this video. Now, what about partial preterists? Well, they try to say that the rapture happened around 70 AD somehow, although nobody remembers it, nobody recorded it, and somehow the church is still here today as if nothing ever happened. We have no remembrance of that. I have no idea where all the resurrected Christians with glorified bodies are hiding. Maybe they're just invisible and we can't see them. But why am I still here without a glorified body? I must have gotten cheated on that promise. So we can already begin to see the absurdity of preterism. You have to pretend the Bible doesn't say what it actually says. All right, so next, the apostasy takes place on earth as the broad day of the Lord starts. We see this in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-3. And then we see the rise of the harlot world religious system that takes place. Revelation 17 talks about this. And the rise of the final one world kingdom. This involves a 10-nation confederacy. And out of this comes the Antichrist. And we see this in Daniel 7, 23-26, Revelation 17, 12-13, and others. So has anyone seen this? Have you guys seen this? I haven't. Not unless you vastly dumb it down to allegorization to the point where it means nothing. No, it never happened. All right, we got to keep this going because there's a lot to talk about. So next, the opening of the first 6 seal judgments occurs, and this results in, among other things, the periodic rise of the Antichrist until he reaches this position of world prominence. It also involves the death of 1/4 of the world's population. Did you hear that? It also talks about a cataclysmic level earthquake, the sun being darkened, the moon becomes like blood, the stars fall to the earth, the heavens departing like a scroll, all the islands and mountains are moved from their places, all the kings of the earth scramble to find shelter in the caves and in the mountains of the earth. And get this, they all openly acknowledge that they're experiencing the wrath of the Lamb in the day of the Lord. And we see this in Isaiah 2, 19-21, Revelation 6, 1-17. Now, if this happened in the past, then surely somebody must have noticed. I mean, guys, think about what we just said. Look at the cosmic global level language. And nobody remembers this? Nobody recorded this anywhere? It'd be kind of a hard thing to sleep through a Monday morning, don't you think? But apparently preterists think it happened. So again, because it's so obvious that it never happened, they have to dumb it down to reduce the severity of these things so that people can be convinced that, well, maybe it's just some poetic language for something that actually happened in Israel in 70 AD, yet nobody remembers it. But as you, I'm sure, can see, doing this causes the text to deny itself, where it doesn't mean what it says. You're just dumbing it down to the point where you're simply deleting the actual words. And guys, as we continue, I'm going to combine some of these together just so that we can move quicker. All right. So next, we have the sealing of 144,000 Jewish evangelists. That takes place with 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. We see that in Revelation 7, 1-8. Then we have the seventh seal being opened, and there's silence in heaven for half an hour, Revelation 8:1. And then also the Antichrist confirms a false covenant with Israel to begin the 70th week of the Daniel 9:24-27 prophecy, also called the tribulation. Verse 27 specifically talks about that. So does anyone remember any of this happening ever? Where are these 144,000 Jews from each tribe? That's a lot of people. Maybe somebody would have noticed that, this evangelization campaign by this huge number of people. Nope. Of course, they'll allegorize it. They'll say it doesn't really mean what it says. But what about the Antichrist? Does anyone remember that? Confirming a 7-year covenant with Israel? Who's the Antichrist? What covenant? When did this happen? Well, the whole sensationalistic-oriented Bible prophecy community, I think, would be quite aware of it, since as it is, they're always trying to invent fulfillments for this 7-year covenant. We've heard about it in the last couple of years. They relate it to some ridiculous UN climate change, COP28 conference, every other nonsense. So just trust me, these people are hyper-focused on wanting to find fulfillments for this stuff. These aren't even preterists. Unfortunately, a lot of these are in our camp. Trust me, they would have found a fulfillment if it already happened. They're on the lookout. Somebody would have known. But to a preterist, all this stuff conveniently happened 2,000 years ago without anyone noticing. So next, we have the first trumpet judgment. That happens, and there's hail and fire mixed with blood cast upon the earth. This results in 1/3 of the trees and all of the grass burning up. It's even worse. Not just 1/3, all. That's Revelation 8:7. So are you guys hearing your Bible? 1/3 of the trees and all of the grass. Can we really say anything even approaching this has ever happened? I mean, how could this not be in our history books? How could nobody know about this? Well, guys, it doesn't get any better from here. You'll see. The next thing is even more extreme. It's the second trumpet judgment, where a burning mountain is thrown into the sea, and it turns 1/3 of the sea, 1/3 of the sea to blood. Revelation 8:8. That would be kind of a noticeable event. No? And I guess not to preterists, because they're not bothered by the fact that nobody remembers these things. It's the most memorable events in history, guys. I guess we're all just not noticed by anybody. In fact, put together this entire sequence of events, not just one thing, this entire sequence would constitute the most notable climax of time in all of history. It's just ignored, though. Nobody witnessed it. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody remembers it. It's not in our history books. And it's funny how all the ancient cultures remember a global cataclysmic flood thousands of years into the future. They all write about this. This is preserved in the histories of all the ancient civilizations. They remember that, but the day of the Lord, which is far worse than the flood, which is what we're talking about. In fact, the New Testament uses the flood as just a prophetic type of the future day of the Lord. It's saying this is just a type of the antitype. This is just a prototype. The real thing is going to be way worse. The real thing is the day of the Lord. And yet everybody remembers the flood. And yet we're supposed to believe that today nobody remembers the day of the Lord. It supposedly happened. Yet preterists want to convince you it happened. So just a total bizarre twisting of the scriptures. But it gets even worse from here. What happens next? We have the third trumpet judgment, and a star called wormwood falls to the earth, and this poisons 1/3 of the waters. 1/3 of the waters. And as a result of this, many people die. Revelation 8:10-11. And then the fourth trumpet judgment happens, and 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars are darkened. Revelation 8:12. And now you guys got to understand, we have Babylonian and Chinese eclipse dates recorded, going all the way back to ancient times. Every time there was an eclipse, they recorded it. So something like this would have happened. 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the stars are darkened. You might think somebody would have recorded it or remembered it. But again, of course, nobody did. But here's when things start to get really fun. So now we have the fifth trumpet judgment, also called the first woe. This happens, and the abyss is opened, and this releases enough smoke to darken the sun and darken the air. We see this in Revelation 9:1-2, and it describes these demonic warrior locusts that come out from the abyss, and they ignore all the plants. Normal locusts would eat all the plants, right? But these ignore all the plant life, but they torture only the unbelievers for a span of 5 months. And they have this scorpion-like sting. It's torture. It's enough to cause people to want to, I'm not going to say that, they want to seek death, but for some reason they're unable to do it. You know what I mean? It's the thing that, YouTube doesn't like you to say. We see that in Revelation 9:3-6. The demonic warrior locusts are shaped like horses, as we're told. They have something resembling crowns of gold, faces like men, hair resembling hair of women, teeth like lions, breastplates of iron. They make a loud noise. They have tails like scorpions for stinging people. This is all told to us in Revelation 9:7-10. Has anyone ever seen this? This sounds like something that you would remember. And then it tells us that the demonic locusts from the abyss actually have a king over them, who is an angel named Abaddon or Apollyon. It explicitly says he's an angel. So these angels have a king angel over them. So they're angels too. Revelation 9:11. Now, I'm trying to keep a straight face while I'm saying all this, because I'm just thinking about how the preterists are going to have to try to squirm and slither out of this one. It's comedy for me just to think about. Do we really need to say any more? I don't think so. To believe that this has happened, what I just described, you either need a psychiatric evaluation or you're just deleting and ignoring the actual words of the scriptures. Plain and simple. You can't say this stuff happened. But guys, it doesn't get better from here. Then the sixth trumpet judgment, also called the second woe, takes place. And when this happens, 4 angels are released from the Euphrates River who kill 1/3 of mankind. 1/3 of mankind. Guys, has this happened? 1/3 of mankind gets killed. Think about this. Okay, and then there's a 200 million horseman army, and the heads of the horses look like lions. They had breastplates of fire, and fire and smoke and brimstone came from their mouths. So after 1/3 of mankind is killed, nobody still repents. This is all in Revelation 9:13-21. So ditto to the last thing. If you think this happened, I don't know what to tell you. You're not interfacing with reality. You live in a movie or something. This is some Star Wars kind of stuff. It's not happened yet, period. There's just no way to say this happened without literally ignoring the words or dumbing it down to the point where the words don't mean anything anymore. We've got to respect the text enough to accept what it actually says on its own terms. Some of this stuff sounds crazy, like you can't imagine it happening. But how about the other things? A global flood? I mean, all the miracles the whole Bible is unbelievable. But if you're going to accept any of it, you have to accept all of it. You can't be the decider of what you accept and what you don't accept. Otherwise, you're not venerating the words of God. You're venerating your own rational mind over it. It's a package deal, guys. You either accept it or you don't. You can't venerate your own rational explanations for why this could never happen. So we'll just say that this is some grandiose spiritual metaphor for the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century? Seriously? Come on. Guys, we have to take the word of God seriously. Okay. So next, after this, the seventh trumpet judgment, also the third woe, happens, and the Lord's upcoming victory and the kingdom reign are proleptically proclaimed. This is in Revelation 11:15-19. It's a proleptic statement, which means it's spoken of with such certainty that it frames it as though it's already happening, already starting, despite the fact that at this point in the narrative, it's still future, because further judgments have to still occur first, as we're going to see. All right. So then the two witnesses prophesy for 1,260 days. They're clothed in sackcloth. Fire comes out of their mouths, consuming their enemies. They also have power to prevent rainfall. They turn water to blood. They smite the earth with plagues at will. This is all in Revelation 11:3-6. So guys, again, if you think that this has happened already, where are you coming from? What are you talking about? You've seen two people do this? Guys, you're watching too much Lord of the Rings or something. Look, I'm just trying to add some humor here because it's like circus clown level ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. If I didn't laugh about it, I think I'd cry instead. But we're not even close to being done. It just keeps getting worse. So the next thing is the two witnesses are then killed, and their bodies lay in the street of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. And people are sending gifts to each other. They're celebrating their death. And to their surprise, they're then resurrected. And this is witnessed by many people who are terrified. They fear it greatly. And there's actually a voice, an audible voice from heaven that calls them up to heaven. And many eyewitnesses actually see this supernaturally take place. They're caught up to heaven in a cloud. They're raptured. This is Revelation 11:7-12. So does anybody remember when this happened? There's all these eyewitnesses, supposedly. The Bible says it. But yet we have no record of this ever happening. So what happens next is we have a colorful description then of the rise of the kingdom of the beast, or the Antichrist, and it says that a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns rises up from the sea. One of his heads seems to have been killed, but then it comes back to life, and all the world is amazed by this, and they worship the beast. This is Revelation 13:1-5. Now, while some of this, of course, is symbolic language, if you go and you read through it, it's obviously describing it symbolically in some way. It's describing an actual series of world events that somebody should have noticed. It's describing real things. But again, of course, nobody did. And any attempt by preterists to find historical fulfillments just reveals its own futility, since it doesn't in any way correspond to the global nature that's being described here. Guys, this is cosmic stuff. It's global stuff. It's not stuff that anybody could miss. It's not stuff that just happened in Israel. The entire tone of it is global. So what happens next? Well, we're told that authority and power is given to the beast for 42 months, and he blasphemes God, and all the earth worships him. He overcomes the tribulation saints. He persecutes them. This is also still in Revelation 13, verses 5-8. This is all said to be global level events that nobody has ever witnessed. Of course, because it never happened. Well, then we have the second beast. This is another beast with two horns that are like a lamb, is the description, and he speaks like a dragon. All right, so that's a little bit symbolic. 2 horns like a lamb, and he speaks like a dragon. Right? Obvious. But it's describing something real. And it says he came up out of the earth. The other one came from the sea. This one came from the earth. And he has the power of the first beast, and he causes all the earth to worship him. Revelation 13:11-12. And the second beast does many great things, signs and deception, deceiving people by doing supposed miracles. And maybe they are miracles. Maybe they're done by the power of Satan. And he even makes fire come down from heaven in the sight of people. But the point is that it's deception to deceive the people into making an image of the beast and then worshiping it. And he actually is said to give life to the beast and even makes it speak. This image of the beast, it becomes animated. and anyone who does not worship it gets killed. Revelation 13:13-15. So the second beast institutes the mark of the beast, this 666 thing, and forces people to either receive the mark in their right hands or in their foreheads. And if they don't do it, they're not going to be able to transact. They can't buy and sell, all right? Which basically means you can't live. This is verses 16-18. So can anyone really keep a straight face and say that this has happened? I know I can't. It's not happened. So we're told then that 3 angels bring messages all over the world, these messenger angels. And the first one circumnavigates the earth and proclaims the eternal gospel to every nation, in every language of people on the earth. This is Revelation 14:6-7. Think about that. The whole point is that it's noticed by people because he speaks to every nation in their own language. All right, so after that, then a second angel basically does the same thing, circumnavigates the earth, goes everywhere, but instead of pronouncing the gospel, it pronounces the fall of Babylon, which is another thing we haven't talked about really yet. The book of Revelation speaks all about Babylon, which if it's taken literally, which is what I side with, it must be expected then to be reestablished. Or if it's taken less literally, could be a label for a city like Rome or New York or something else. That's Revelation 14:8. All right, I'll leave that one up to you. And then a third angel does the same thing, but he warns against worshiping the beast and taking his mark. Verses 9-11. So has anyone ever seen these angels? Anyone in history ever seen these angels? Does anyone know anyone who ever has? Is there any historical account of anything like this? Guys, of course the answer is no, but preterists have to believe that this all happened in the first century. And it's funny how I guess they were such awful historians back then, despite the fact that you have historians like Josephus recording every detail of the 70 AD war and never mentions anything that can even be remotely confused with any of these things. Now, he did record certain miracles that took place, but nothing like this, not these. So guys, I hope you're seeing the insanity of this belief, and we're not even through the tribulation yet here. We still have the millennial kingdom to go. Because remember, the preterists say we're in the kingdom, so we're going to have to look at the kingdom, what the Bible says about it, and see does it comport with today. But we got a long way to go. So make yourself comfortable. I hope this is actually a nice review of the end times chronology for you. Maybe not a perfectly strict order of things, but it's basically how I'm presenting is basically how the Bible presents it, knowing that some chapters are parenthetical. All right. But for the sake of this video, we're just following the way that Revelation lays it out. So then after this, at the midpoint of the tribulation, we're told that the Antichrist breaks the covenant with Israel. We talked about the covenant before. It's a 7-year covenant. And then at the midpoint, he breaks this covenant and he puts a stop to the temple sacrifices. This is Daniel 9:27. And it's around this time that the Antichrist stands up in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, which means there is a temple has to be rebuilt, presenting himself as a god to be worshipped, as Paul tells us very clearly in 2 Thessalonians 2:2-4. So are we really to believe that this has happened already? Well, preterists are going to say yes, and they're going to find some watered down so-called fulfillment in the first century. They often say that it has something to do with the general Titus Vespasian, the Roman general who destroyed Jerusalem in the 70 AD war, but they never mention that the histories that are written about this time by Josephus, who meticulously records everything, actually says the opposite, that Titus never even entered the temple or the Holy of Holies, that he was actually upset when his people burned it down. He admired the architecture of it, of the temple. He wanted to preserve it. But the Josephus tells us that a torch got thrown into the temple by one of the soldiers and it caught fire and burned down. And Titus certainly never set himself up as a god in the Holy of Holies. He never even entered it. There's just no historical record of this whatsoever. It's just preterists grasping at straws to try to convince you not to take the Bible literally and seriously. All right, so then what happens in the latter half of the tribulation? Well, there's this whole narrative about national Israel. We're told that during the latter half of the tribulation, the nation of Israel is going to face a time of distress and persecution like they've never seen before, something even worse than the Holocaust, unfortunately. Now, 2/3 of Jews living in the land of Israel are going to be killed, it tells us. Their own scriptures tell us that. I'm just telling you what it says, right? But the final 1/3 are going to come to faith in Jesus as their Messiah through the refining fire of the tribulation persecutions. Now we're told this in Daniel 12:1, Jeremiah 30:4-7, Zechariah 13:8-9. We're told that through all of this, a remnant of Israel turns to Christ in repentance. Hosea 5:15, Deuteronomy 4:30-31, Zechariah 12:10, 13:9. Matthew 23:39, Romans 11:26, many others. And this is told to us also in Revelation 12. A whole chapter is written about this in the sign, the heavenly sign that John was shown, where the woman, which clearly represents Israel, figurative language here, but it describes a real event. And the Bible typically tells you how to interpret its own symbolism. So clearly, the woman is Israel. Israel then flees into the wilderness from the great red dragon's persecution. The red dragon is explicitly interpreted as being a reference to Satan, and that this happens during the final half of the 7-year tribulation, or the 1260 days, the final half of that week. And it says that God is a place in the wilderness prepared for the righteous remnant of Israel who escapes to try to hide. Revelation 12:6. We're told that war takes place in heaven and Satan and his angels are cast out to the earth. Verses 7-9. And that causes Satan's persecution of the woman. He then goes and turns his anger against her, chases her into the wilderness, tries to flood her out, but the earth swallows up the flood. All right, so Satan then goes after her offspring, which probably refers to non-Jewish tribulation saints. That's in verses 13-17. So all of this is pretty specific, and it's a saga that involves Israel in the latter half of the tribulation. But preterists, of course, are going to deny any of this. They're going to say that the tribulation already happened in the first century. It's all been done. But they're never able to actually give you specifics. They're not able to say, it started at this time, it ended at this time. This is how it lines up without dumbing it down. They have to dumb it down because it just doesn't work. And that's really the problem. You have to take their word for it. They're just using their imagination, but you have to take their word for it. You know, using your imagination is a fun exercise when you're dealing with the realm of make-believe and fiction. Like I said before, storybooks, like for kids. But it's just not an acceptable way of navigating the Bible. You can't treat the Bible like some kind of storybook that you just interpret any way you want. You know, it's kind of like the law or the founding documents, like the Constitution. Well, you wouldn't accept somebody just allegorizing it and saying, well, you don't actually have any rights and it doesn't actually apply to you. It's not really talking about you. It's talking about somebody else. You know, and they give you this whole imaginative scenario that just rips the actual text of the Constitution out of its original context and away from the original intent of its authors. You'd never buy into that. And yet the Bible is God's word, and people think they can treat it this way. Not okay, guys. All right, so next you have the bowl judgments. We're not even through the tribulation yet, and I'm just going to try to go through these very quickly. But again, just notice how none of these can really be thought of as historical events if you actually take them seriously. We're told that the first bowl judgment is poured out, and these horrible malignant sores break out on everyone who took the mark of the beast, and who had worshipped the beast. Revelation 16:2. And then the second bowl judgment happens, and the sea turns to blood. Everything in it dies, in verse 3. Think about that. Everything in it dies, and it turns to blood. Then you have the third bowl judgment, and all of the rivers and the springs become blood. So even if you didn't live by the sea, all of your water becomes blood also. You'd notice. Verses 4-7. All right. And then the fourth bowl judgment is poured out, and the sun scorches men with fire and intense heat, in verses 8-9. Then you have the fifth bowl judgment. It plunges the earth into darkness, verses 10 to 11. The sixth bowl judgment then happens, and it results in the Euphrates River drying up. And this prepares a way for the Armageddon conflict. The kings of the east, they're going to bring their armies toward Jerusalem across this dried up riverbed. This is in Revelation 16, 12 to 16. All right, so before we continue on, again, just listen to the language. These are global, cosmic judgments that if you take it seriously, if you take it literally, must be expected in the future, because we can't say anything like this has ever happened in the past. Obviously, not even close. Guys, just listen to the language. The sea turns to blood and everything in it dies. The rivers, the springs, everything turns to blood. Everything dies. That's kind of a memorable thing. We don't have any record of anything like that ever happening. But we're supposed to just trust that the preterists say it did happen. Guys, come on. They're turning the Bible into some kind of like a clown show, all right? So, okay, next, the Son of Man with a sickle is said to reap the earth and casts it into the winepress of the wrath of God. Now, obviously, that's symbolic language, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It unleashes the conditions that result in the Battle of Armageddon, where the depth of bloodshed is going to reach the height of a horse's bridle for a total distance of about 180 miles, we're told. So this really happens. But it's talking about it in terms of, like a sickle reaping the earth, kind of like agriculture, right? And in the wine press of the wrath of God, like you're stomping wines in a wine press to make, or grapes rather, to make wine, right? So these are agricultural symbols, but everyone understands that they refer to something literal, okay? And it tells you what it is in numerous places, all right? This is Revelation 14, 14 to 20. Isaiah 63, Revelation 19. So again, this is portrayed as the most epic battle in the history of mankind, and yet we have no record of it. Guys, do you understand how many records of ancient warfare we have today? But yet this is the most epically ridiculous battle ever, and we have no record of it, because it didn't happen yet. Very simple. So then after this, what happens? Well, you have the seventh bowl judgment. It's poured out, and there's lightning, there's thunder, there's the greatest earthquake in history that takes place. And this earthquake actually causes Jerusalem to split in half, and many Gentile cities get destroyed. And there's great hailstones, get this, weighing about 100 pounds that pummel the earth. Again, the mountains and the islands, just like an earlier judgment, they're moved. Revelation 16, 17 to 21. Memorable stuff. Then you have the great city of Babylon, the Babylon of the end times. It falls in the span of 1 hour, and the smoke of her torment, her destruction, is seen far away. She's lamented by the merchants of the earth in Revelation 18. So once again, these are epic global events, cataclysmic level judgments, and yet we're supposed to believe that this happened already and that we have no record of it? This escaped the notice of every person on the planet? Of course not. The preterists are just going to dumb it down and say, well, it doesn't really mean that. It's just sort of like a nursery rhyme. It doesn't really mean what it says. You can kind of just interpret it any way you want. Just listen to us. We'll tell you exactly what it means, and we're going to tell you exactly when it happened. You just kind of have to use your imagination and not really take it that seriously. Guys, that's what you have to buy into in order to become a preterist. So next, the marriage supper of the Lamb. It's announced in heaven. You have the bride of Christ being given white bridal garments to wear. This is Revelation 19, 1 to 10. And we see that heaven then opens, and the Lord Jesus Christ is seen on a white horse with the armies of heaven following him as he returns to the earth for his second coming proper at the end of the tribulation. That's how this whole period ends. And I want to pause here for a second, because preterists actually want to say this happened in the first century, if you can believe that. Just let that sink in. Jesus returned 2,000 years ago, supposedly after heaven opens up and reveals him riding a horse with armies of heaven behind him. Nobody remembers this. Nobody saw it. We're supposed to believe that. And yet here we are with no clue that that happened. Imagine being the church. Everything you're looking forward to, everything you're living for is exactly this. This is what you're living for. But we have no clue it happened. It's kind of just an accident of history and kind of swept into the dustbin of history, as they say. We just have to believe the preterists because magically they know all about it, but nobody else does. Unbelievable. All right, so the next thing that we're told is then that Jesus returns. We just described it, but what happens when he comes back? Well, he first goes to a place called Basra. And could this be Petra? I think most likely in southern Jordan, where the remnant of Israel have been hiding in the wilderness. We talked about it before. As her enemies chase her. We talked about that. But at this point, Jesus comes back and he defeats her enemies who are surrounding her there. And he then leaves to approach Jerusalem. And he's seen coming to the city wearing the blood-stained robe, showing how he massacred the enemies pursuing Israel at Basra. And his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives, Jerusalem, causing a great earthquake to split it in two, as we talked about. Creates this enormous valley, this rift. And then he brings final judgment on his enemies. And he sentences the beast and the false prophet to the lake of fire. And then a huge mountain of the corpses of his enemies acts as a feast for the birds. We're told about this in so many passages. Isaiah 63, 1-6, Joel 3, 11-16, Daniel 7, 13-14, Zechariah 14, 2-9, Matthew 24, 15-21, 27-31, Acts 1, 10-11, Jude 1, 14-15, Revelation 12, 6, Revelation 19, 11-21. It's talked about all over the place. And again, just think about the language, the scope of what's being communicated. Of course, it's never happened historically. Huge earthquake splitting cities in half, Jerusalem, Jesus fighting against enemies of Israel and making a mountain of dead bodies for the birds to eat. Guys, come on. All right, so this is where things transition now into the millennium, the millennial kingdom, the messianic kingdom, the kingdom age, where 1,000 years is prophesied, where Christ is going to rule and reign on the earth from Jerusalem, which of course preterists are not expecting because they think it was either fulfilled already, and as usual, they have to allegorize it away so that it really doesn't mean what it says, or that we're sort of in it now. So keep that in mind as we go through all these very clear millennial kingdom prophecies that I'm going to show you. All right, so first, we're told that Satan is chained for 1,000 years. So in other words, for this entire kingdom, he's going to be chained until the very end. And at the end, he's loose for a very short time to once again deceive the nations at the end of the 1,000 years. Revelation 21-3. So right off the bat, this one just makes my jaw drop. Just to think that preterists could possibly imagine that we're in the kingdom right now, or that it happened, or whatever, and that Satan is chained up. Think about that. I don't know how anyone could possibly buy into that. Satan is chained up right now. If this is the kingdom, then like so many people have said, Satan's chain is way too loose. Because if this is Satan chained up, then nothing means anything anymore. Words have no meaning at this point. Think about it. Just watch the news at night. Satan's chained up? All right, we got to keep going. We got a lot to get through. So let me just try to get through these a little bit quicker. Just listen to all of these prophecies that discuss the transition from the tribulation, from the judgment phase of the day of the Lord, now into the blessing phase of the day of the Lord, the millennial kingdom. And remember, to a preterist, these all happened already, or they're happening now. Just think about how delusional you have to be to buy into this. All right, so the tribulation martyrs get resurrected, and they're granted to reign with Christ during the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, Revelation 24. And obviously the church is going to be reigning along with him. We'll talk about that. Also, the resurrection of Old Testament saints. They're going to enter the millennial kingdom. We're told this in places like Job 19:25-27, Daniel 7:27, Daniel 12:1-2. And we're told that national Israel experiences her second and final worldwide regathering. It's a regathering this time in faith. This is talked about all throughout the Old Testament. I'll just give you a couple. Deuteronomy 31-6, Isaiah 11:11-12, Isaiah 27, 12 to 13, Isaiah 43, 5 to 7, Jeremiah 31, 7 to 11, and then in the New Testament in Matthew 24, 29 to 31. Now, obviously, Israel has only experienced one worldwide regathering so far, and it's been a regathering in unbelief. It's the one that we've witnessed over the past 100 years or so. And the unrepentant Jews will be picked out of all the nations in the future where they live, and they're going to be purged and not allowed entrance into the kingdom, because only the righteous enter into the kingdom. Ezekiel 20, 33 to 38. So has that ever happened? Of course not. Now, what happens then? Well, Jesus judges the nations as king at the beginning of the millennial kingdom, we're talking about still, and he separates the sheep from the goats. This is called the sheep and goat judgment. Matthew 25, 31 to 46, where the goats are sent into eternal damnation while the sheep are welcome to enter the kingdom. Guys, think. This has never happened. Please, this has never happened. There's never been any group of people that gets separated and half of them are sent to eternal damnation while I don't know if it's half, but a big portion are, and then the other portion that remain are allowed to enter the kingdom. What are you talking about if you think this has happened? When? All right, so then Jesus establishes his millennial kingdom reign where he physically sits on the throne in Jerusalem. This is talked about in so many places, I'm not even going to read all of the references. They're on the screen. You can go look them up. He's physically there, guys. He's reigning in Jerusalem. That's what the millennial kingdom is all about. So that now we're talking about, at this point in the sequence of events, the millennial kingdom has now been established. And now I'm going to take you through some of the multitude of biblical prophecies about this 1,000-year kingdom age. The messianic kingdom, where all these messianic prophecies to Israel get fulfilled. Just go look in the Old Testament. They're all there. I'm going to show you all the references. It's all talked about in future terms, in terms of in that day, talking about in the day of the Lord. That's the culmination of this time period. It's what we think of as eschatology. It's talking about the blessing aspect. All right, so preterists think that we're in this kingdom now, but as I tell you these, just think to yourself if it reminds you at all of the world that you live in today. I promise you it's not going to. So the first thing, and this is probably, again, the most foundational of all millennium prophecies or characteristics that talk about this time period. It's that during the millennium, the Lord reigns from Jerusalem. But we're also told that all nations are going to seek his law and they're going to come to worship before him. It's what makes the millennium or the messianic kingdom. There has to be a king Messiah reigning, or also the messianic age. Okay, it's the earthly kingdom reign of the king Messiah. This is all over the Old Testament. Daniel 7, 13 to 14, Psalm 22, 27 to 28, Isaiah 2, 1 to 4, Joel 3, 17, Zechariah 2, 10 to 13, Zechariah 8, 3 and verse 23, Zechariah 14, 16 to 21, Micah 4, 1 to 2, Malachi 1, 11. It's all over the place, and those are just a couple of them. So does that look to be happening today? Is the Lord reigning from Jerusalem? Currently a completely pagan city, pagan in the sense of they reject the Messiah, a city with no trace of Jesus to be found anywhere. I guess you have the so-called Christian quarter, but most of the city rejects him. There is no temple, no palace, no messianic throne, no nothing. And most of the inhabitants of the city, again, they reject him. They're Jewish, they're Muslim. So Jesus is not physically reigning in Jerusalem, and all the nations are not coming there to worship him or to seek his laws. It just doesn't fit. So next you have the church reigning with Christ during the millennium. Revelation 2, 26 to 27, Revelation 5, 9 to 10, and Revelation 20, verse 6. So I don't know about you, but I definitely don't feel like I'm reigning right now over anything. Now, Christians in most parts of the world, don't feel like they're reigning either because they're routinely being persecuted for their witness of Jesus. I think only a person in America could possibly buy into this idea that Christians today are reigning in the kingdom. It just doesn't line up with reality. We're in the church age where the New Testament promises us persecution. It promises us that we're going to be rejected. It never promises that we reign until the millennium. It also promises us constant tribulations of life, the regular troubles of life, which doesn't seem to be promised for the millennium. We're in glorified bodies then. We're ruling and reigning with Christ. We don't have the same troubles, the same tribulations, the same rejection from the world, the same persecution. It's completely opposite. It's a total contrast. Things are going to be far different in the millennium, which is, again, we're going to have glorified resurrection bodies, which is basically an eternal body that can't be killed by mortals. Do you think Christians who are ruling and reigning with Christ in the millennium can be killed by mortals, by people, by unbelievers, because they're being persecuted? Guys, listen to the language. None of this matches up at all. All right, here's another big one. And it's also one that's so basic and so foundational that it just can't be confused with today. It's that during the millennial kingdom, national Israel will acknowledge her Messiah, Jesus Christ. This is all through the Old Testament. Isaiah 25:9, Isaiah 26:8, Hosea 5:15, Zechariah 12:10-12, Matthew 23:39, Revelation 1:7, many other places. So again, this is basic to what the millennium even is. It's the whole point. The millennium is really all about national Israel receiving the fulfillment of her promises, which includes this state of spiritual restoration and, of course, national restoration. But we're talking about the spiritual side right now, which, of course, requires them to acknowledge their Messiah. Again, it's the whole point. So do we see that today? Well, you can do a little experiment yourself. You can locate a Jewish person in your community, if you live in a Jewish community, and ask them what they think about Jesus. Well, I live here in northern New Jersey, and the town that I grew up in had 3 synagogues at the time. I think there might only be 2 now, but there's a lot of Jewish people that live here. And I can tell you from personal experience, they're not big fans of Jesus. In fact, if you even mention Jesus to them, they perceive it as harassment, basically. All right, so also during the millennial kingdom, like I just mentioned, Israel is going to have experienced spiritual cleansing and regeneration as a nation, and they're going to receive the new covenant. The entire nation is going to be saved, and they're going to know the Lord. This is through so many places in the Old Testament, I'm not even going to read them. You can see them. So guys, even the Apostle Paul acknowledges these Old Testament promises. He reaffirms it in Romans. He reaffirms that it's his own future expectation for their future. This is a basic promise of the Bible. And again, even Paul quotes the prophecy from Isaiah that says, "And all Israel will be saved," after basically spending 3 chapters answering the question of, so what's going to happen with national Israel, since at the present time, they've rejected the Messiah? Well, Paul tells you exactly what's going to happen, and he never even once doubts that the promises of the Old Testament to Israel are still going to be fulfilled in national Israel in the future. All right, so here's another one. It's just completely opposite of today. During the millennium, Israel as a nation is going to be exalted over the Gentiles. Isaiah 14:1-2, Isaiah 49:22-23, Isaiah 60:14-17, Isaiah 61:6-7. Well, guys, if you know anything about the history of the past 2,000 years, you know it's the opposite of what's being said here, where Jews have been persecuted. They've been chased from place to place for millennia. But during the millennium, Jerusalem and Israel, the Jewish people, are going to be reestablished as the focal point. None of that persecution is possible at that time. In fact, there's a millennial prophecy in Zechariah 8:23 that says that 10 men from various nations are going to grab hold of one Jewish man's robe, saying, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." Guys, I don't think that's the tenor of this present age. And if you do, I want you to show me where that's happening, when that's ever happened. Because what I see is the opposite. I see widespread Jew hatred. I see Israel hatred. I see conspiracy theories about how awful Jews are and how they're basically responsible for everything bad on the planet. It's all over the internet. And actually, a lot of people like this belief of preterism because it enables their anti Semitism. They want to be Christian, but they are anti Semitic. They don't want to see that Israel has a future. They don't want to see that there's this future age where Israel is going to be the focal point. So the easy way out is to just adopt one of these views. But really, you can say that pretty much everything aside from the premillennial viewpoint basically denies Israel's future. Basically. I'm not going to say that strictly, but basically. They all, to a degree, have to allegorize it away and apply it to the church. All right, so let's continue. So the Bible is clear that during the millennium, that there's going to be a millennial temple that's going to be built according to very specific dimensions that actually the prophet Ezekiel provides for us. And we're told that worship is reinstituted. Ezekiel 37, 26 to 28, Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48, Joel 3:18, Zechariah 14, 16 to 21. And here's another one. Temple sacrifices are going to be reinstituted throughout the millennial age. Ezekiel 43, 13 to 17, 45, 13 to 25, Isaiah 56, 7. This is clear. But a lot of people don't understand this, and they think that all Old Testament sacrifices were to atone for sins and that Jesus did that once and for all, so they get tripped up with this one. But no, in the millennium, what people don't understand is there's going to be a reestablishment of the national theocracy of Israel. And the original purpose of many of those Old Testament sacrifices are going to function to maintain Israel in that theocratic harmony with the living God who's dwelling in their midst. Don't forget about that. God is going to be dwelling in their midst. So this purpose was functionally distinct from the redemptive work of Christ on the cross. The two have nothing directly to do with one another. And again, some people say it's just for a memorial, but that's not correct either. Millennial sacrifices are not going to just memorialize Christ's redemption, but they're going to primarily function in restoring and maintaining New Covenant Israel in theocratic harmony with a God who's dwelling in their midst. It's a subject I can't really talk about anymore in this video. It's going to require a future video that I'm going to do at some point. So, all right, let's now talk about some other future millennial prophecies that obviously are not happening today. So one is that during the millennium, the earth experiences changes that even affect nature itself. Nature itself is going to be at peace with itself and with humans. We're told things like the wolf is going to dwell with the lamb and not hurt it. Things like children are going to play near venomous snakes and not going to get bit. They're going to stick their hand right into the den of a poisonous snake and they're going to be fine. Isaiah 11, 1 to 10, 65, 25, Hosea 2:18. So is that happening today? Have you tried some snake handling recently? I wouldn't recommend it. You ever watch National Geographic? You see any of those animal shows? Like the wolves are hunting out in Yellowstone and they're killing things. I don't think the wolves are dwelling peacefully with the lambs right now. They can't even seem to get along with the elk and the moose and the whatever. So in fact, I routinely also see video evidence that shows this is not the case. These videos always come up for me on YouTube. So no, we're not in the millennium. All right, how about this one? People during the millennium are going to live very long lives. It's going to be said that a person who only lives 100 years will be young at their time of death. Isaiah 65:20. So how many people do you know personally that lived even to 100? Well, I'm sure you might be able to name, one person, maybe two if you have a healthy family, but that's a rarity. But in the millennium, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be rare for the opposite reason, because the far majority of people at that time are going to live well past their hundreds. And it sounds like it's going to be similar to the pre-flood time, where people were routinely living over 500 years, almost to 1,000. So this undoubtedly is because Earth is going to be restored in every way. So you're going to have long life. You're going to have health that's going to return to people. And so if you take the text seriously, you can't say that that refers to today. Most people never even reach to 100. Now, here's another one. During the millennium, all nations are going to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and are going to send a delegation to Jerusalem for this purpose annually. And any nation who does not do this is going to experience no rain as a judgment. Zechariah 14:16-19. So is this happening now? No, no, and no. No part of this is happening now. All right, now here's an interesting one. And for some reason, I always kind of like this one. I don't really know why, but to me, it just kind of sounds like a utopia where very little goes wrong, at least compared to today. And that is exactly what the millennium is. Zechariah 14:20, it tells us that during the millennium, the horses are going to wear bells with the inscription, Holiness unto the Lord. How cool is that? Even the horses have praise to God written on the bells around their necks. Have you ever in your life seen anything like that? I haven't, and I live within about half an hour from a lot of horse farms and horse country. Out near Trump's Bedminster Golf Club, it's all horse farms. And I've never heard of any of them having this inscription. All right, here's another one. During the millennium, the land itself is going to experience topographical and weather-related changes, and it's going to cause the desolate areas, like the deserts, to experience restoration. You're going to have the desert areas of Israel specifically that are going to bloom and blossom, and the world is going to be restored to near Garden of Eden type conditions. Isaiah 35, 1-10, Isaiah 62, 4, Ezekiel 36, 33-36, and 47, 8-12. So is this happening today? Well, does Israel still have desert areas? Yes, a lot of them. In fact, it's mostly all like that. And all the surrounding nations are that way too. The Middle East is basically a huge desert. So yeah, none of this matches with today. Well, how about this one? During the millennium, there's going to be a highway in Israel called the Way of Holiness, or the Highway of Holiness, and only the righteous are going to travel on it. Isaiah 35, 8-10. So is anybody aware of this highway today in Israel? I'm not, because it doesn't exist. All right, here's another one. During the millennium, nations are going to no longer learn or practice war. Weapons are going to be converted into agricultural implements, tools, since there's no longer any need for them. So instead of nations going to war, the Lord, who's dwelling right there in Jerusalem, is going to mediate disputes himself. And there's going to be this widespread righteousness in the earth. It's going to be a time of peace. Isaiah 2, 1-5, 14, 3-7, Micah 5, 2-5. And so this doesn't sound much like today, does it? There's wars, conflict, violence all over the world right now, and there's always been. In fact, even Israel is at war right now. And so no, we're not in the millennium. Or think about this one. During the millennium, Jerusalem is going to be safely inhabited without threat or attack of war. Zechariah 14:11, Amos 9:15. And like I just said, no, this doesn't work for today because Israel is actually at war right at this very moment. And Jerusalem and Israel are not safe, which is why they're at war. They keep getting attacked and harassed. So no, we're not in the millennium. Guys, think about the level of allegorism that you'd have to employ in order to convince yourself that this is speaking about today. You'd have to, first of all, change Jerusalem and Israel to mean something totally different. You'd have to change it to mean that being at war doesn't actually mean being at war, or being at peace doesn't really mean being at peace, because there's literally no context today where anyone can say they're never at war. Every nation has been at war. Over the last couple of thousand years, every group has experienced conflict. You literally have to change the meaning of the words itself and make it mean the opposite of what it's saying. But at that point, again, like I keep saying, it then means nothing at all. And that's what preterists really depend on. You have to allow them to mutilate the Bible and trust them completely instead of trusting God's word completely. You have to trust the people who are making the word deny itself. That's preterism. All right, during the millennium, the Lord is going to reign, and he's going to ensure that there's justice throughout the government of his kingdom. And obviously his kingdom is global, So justice globally, through all the governments of the world globally, because they all answer to him. Psalm 72, 1 to 19, Isaiah 9, 6 to 7, Isaiah 32, 1 to 2. So the question is there a lot of real justice happening today? Well, in our court system, in our governments, even in the so-called church, the answer is no, of course not. We live in a cover-up culture, and that's just as strong in the so-called church as it is in the secular world. If you don't know about it, you're blissfully ignorant. But none of that nonsense will exist in the kingdom. All right. And even if we go through time periods in the church age where things are exposed, that doesn't mean that there's no cover up, that there's no corruption. Corruption is always going to happen in the church age. But in the millennium, there's widespread justice, and any kind of corruption is going to get dealt with quickly. That's what happens. All right. So what about this then? You have King David in the millennium is going to rule as a vice regent under Jesus Christ in Jerusalem. Isaiah 55, 3 to 4, Jeremiah 39, Ezekiel 34, 23, 37, 24, and Hosea 3, 5. In addition to that, the apostles, the 12 apostles, are going to sit on 12 thrones judging Israel. Matthew 19, 28. Obviously, none of that is happening today. All right, during the millennial kingdom, how about this one? All sickness is going to be removed. Isaiah 30, 26, 33, 24, Jeremiah 30, 17, Ezekiel 34, 16. Well, I happen to work for the largest medical company in the world, and they exist today because all sickness has not been removed. I see it every day. It's the reason that their stock price keeps going up, because there's a market for medical products, because people are sick and people need surgery and everything else. All right? So we're not in the kingdom today. This doesn't fit at all. Or how about this? During the millennial kingdom, the sun and the moon are going to give more light than they do currently. That's Isaiah 30, 26. Well, does anybody remember when this started? Because I don't. The answer is no, because it hasn't started. All right, so let's now talk about some of the end of the millennium prophecies. At the end of the millennium, you have Satan being released once again, as we said before, and he's going to tempt the world for a limited time period. And it's going to result in him leading a innumerable army of people that he's deceived against the Lord in Jerusalem. And he gets quickly and soundly defeated, where Satan and his followers are thrown then permanently into the lake of fire. That's Revelation 27 to 12. Obviously, guys, this has not happened. We don't need to really spend time on this. It's just that obvious. And then also the white throne judgment occurs at the end of the millennium, where the unrighteous of all time periods, all of human history, they're resurrected for their final judgment of eternal damnation. And we have hell being emptied into the lake of fire because there's so many people. Revelation 20, 11 to 15. Then also at the end of the millennium, the heavenly New Jerusalem descends and it seems to touch down onto the earth. And it's described for us. It says that the length, the width, and the height of the city are each what equates to us to being 1,342 miles. This would cover over half the United States and stretch upwards into lower Earth orbit, where the International Space Station is currently situated. We're told all this in Revelation 21. Okay, obviously, none of this has ever happened. All right, that's the millennium. As we can see, none of it at all corresponds to the current day that we live in today whatsoever. In fact, it's all the direct opposite, which is the whole point, because the millennium is a special time unlike today because of the fact that Jesus is here physically ruling in Jerusalem, and it's just a different time period. He's not letting things go at that time. We're told that. He responds quickly with decisive punishment. People don't get out of line until the very end, where they're allowed to, in order for Satan to lead them against the holy city again, and they get decisively, finally, ultimately ended. All right? So before we finish this video, let's just mention a couple more prophecies that still haven't happened. These are not millennial prophecies, but they might be in the tribulation or in the gap period before it after the rapture happens, or some of them definitely are. And again, this is the judgment phase of the broad day of the Lord. Or some of these could actually happen during the church age. It could be happening in the next couple of years. We don't know while we're still here. But the point is, they haven't happened yet, which again defeats the preterist claims that everything has already happened. So let's talk about a couple of these. So you have Damascus being destroyed in one night. This is in Isaiah 17:1 and 14. You have the Iran, or in biblical terms, the Elam disaster that causes a Iranian worldwide diaspora of people. This is Jeremiah 49:34-39. You have a coalition of 7 Arab nations that are going to march on Israel. Psalm 83, 1-8. And Israel is victorious over them. Psalm 83, 9-12. Now, that event does seem to have some similarities with what happened around 1948 and 1967, but there's enough differences to force us to expect that the Psalm 83 event is still future. It was not fulfilled. Another one is Israel dwells securely in their land without walls and gates. Ezekiel 38:11. Now, obviously, that's not happening today. There's a ton of walls that Israel has had to build due to the ongoing constant terror attacks. All right, another thing is the Gog-Magog alliance that occurs. And the countries that are involved, like Russia, Iran, Turkey, North Africa, they launch a surprise attack. And their objective is to take plunder from Israel. This is Ezekiel 38, 1-6 and verse 12. And God intervenes against Gog and Magog after no nation comes to Israel's defense, and he turns those nations against each other in confusion. Ezekiel 38, 18-23. And after this Gog-Magog alliance is defeated supernaturally, the Jews and many other nations recognize that God had a hand in the victory from that day forward. Ezekiel 38:16 and verse 23, 39:7 and verse 22. And if you were to just go and read the details about all of this, in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, it's abundantly obvious that all these things are still future. All right, guys, this has been a long video because the Bible has so much to say about the future. And yet again, if you listen to preterists, they're going to try to convince you all these things have already happened. And the only way they can realistically even attempt to do this is by having a subjectively allegorical hermeneutic. Again, they're going to tell you that all the first coming prophecies of Jesus happened literally. They admit that. But when it comes to the events connected to the second coming, they abruptly switch their hermeneutical methodology and they jump to allegorism, where the text doesn't really have to mean what it says, and the preterist just claims the freedom of interpreting it to mean whatever they want it to mean, dumbing it down in the process to the point where the words don't actually mean anything anymore. But as dispensationalists, our hermeneutic is built on the consistent application of a literal, plain, historical reading of the Bible, just the same as we would read anything else. And unless there's a clear reason in the text itself to see it as a metaphor, then we simply understand it according to what it actually says. And even when there is a metaphor, it's either obvious what it actually means or it's interpreted in the Bible for us. We don't take the liberty to come up with wild interpretations that totally change the meaning. And so when we look at the Bible consistently, literally, we understand that the prophecies that have already been fulfilled so far, we see that they've actually been fulfilled literally, exactly as the text shows. And that is an established track record. And that gives us the reason to then expect the currently unfulfilled future prophecies to one day be fulfilled in exactly the same way. And so you need to keep all this in mind when you encounter these people on social media and in the YouTube comments. Remember, there's always fairly easy answers to their critiques, but the same cannot be said the other way around, as I hope to have demonstrated in this video. So when you actually read the text, it forces them to just deny what it says, plain and simple. And so through simple reading comprehension, we can very easily dismiss the lie of preterism. So I want to thank you guys for watching this long video. God bless you, and I will see you on the next video.